Good evening and welcome. I am Uyai Anyeka and come to you live from Uyo, the capital city of Akwa Ibom State, Nigeria. Today on Spotlight Africa. Ivory Coast President Ouattara forecast GDP growth of 7.2% in 2023. Court declines to unfreeze Felician Kabuga's assets in Kenya, I beg your pardon. Ghana deactivates more than 6 million SIM cards. WHO warns of biological hazard at seized lab. Plus, families of jailed Tunisians make European Union sanctions call. These stories are all just ahead on Spotlight Africa. Do stay with us. Thanks for joining us. First on today's Spotlight Africa, Ivory Coast President Alassane Ouattara has pointed out the resilience of the Ivorian economy in the face of crisis due to the difficult international situation and announces brighter economic prospects. In his third State of the Nation address to the members of parliament and senators at the Sofitel Abidjan, the head of state stressed that in the face of global inflation, the Ivorian government has taken measures to maintain this upward trend. According to him, Côte d'Ivoire has supported milers to the tune of 62 billion CFA francs, including 2 billion to strengthen the food sector due to the rise in the price of wheat as a result of the Russian-Ukraine war. He added that for fuel, 725 billion CFA francs in state subsidies have been granted to mitigate the impact of international price increases on the cost of transport and goods, a really good step forward there by Ivory Coast. In another development, a court has declined to unfreeze the assets of Rwanda genocide suspect Felician Kabuga in Kenya. The Kenya Anti-Corruption Court rejected Kabuga's son Nyimsu Nwenri Donatian's plea to allow his aged 15 years ago. The case, filed in 2008, sought to have Kabuga's property forfeited and its proceeds used to compensate genocide victims and their families. At the time, Kabuga was a fugitive. According to reports, Kabuga's wife, in her submissions filed before the court, had argued that the Kenyan government had no proof that the contested property was acquired through crime proceeds. She also claimed that there was no proof that Kabuga used the rent collected from the house to evade arrest. It will be recalled that Kabuga, one of the key suspects of the 1994 Rwandan genocide, was arrested in France in 2020 after evading capture for about 26 years. He has been charged with several counts of genocide and crimes against humanity. Still in Kenya, where police have arrested a popular televangelist and closed his church in the coast as investigations continue into a religious cult that's been linked to the deaths of nearly 100 people. Pastor Ezekiel Odero, who is famed for drawing huge crowds at his functions, was arrested today after the police inspect the morgue attendants had been collecting bodies at the church premises. This is quite a grievous issue happening in Kenya. More lives have continued, more dead bodies have continued to be excavated from graves around the church premises. We move now to Ghana, where authorities have deactivated 6.1 million mobile SIM cards that have not been registered with the communication regulator. The deactivated cards belong to subscribers who had not completed the ongoing nationwide registration that began in October of 2021. According to the National Communications Authority (NCA), Joe Anoki, the Director General of the NCA, on Wednesday said there were approximately 11 million active but unregistered subscribers who will be deactivated from network the country. The registration is part of the efforts by the NCA to curb fraudulent activities associated with the use of SIM cards in the country. Moving away from that, hundreds of Ethiopians have attended the funeral for legendary musician Nzerhon Wodajo in the capital Addis Ababa. The 63-year-old was known for his songs, economically marginalized. Unlike some of his contemporaries, he never went into exile. His last big hit was in 2015, had the lyrics, "I am not dead, I am bringing up a generation," reflecting his dedication to Oromo cause. Such was the love shown to him by his fans that they had recently bought him a house, and when he needed medical treatment, they paid for him to go to India, where he died. He was laid to rest at Addis Ababa's main Orthodox Church, Holy Trinity Cathedral. May the soul of the music activist rest in peace. Meanwhile, Ethiopia said Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam GERD, the Foreign Ministry reported. State Minister for Foreign Affairs Meganu Aga made the comments during talks with the U.S. Special Envoy for the Horn of Africa, Mike Hammer. Meanwhile, construction and operation of the dam has strained relations between Ethiopia and Egypt, which demands a legally binding agreement on the dam. In the meantime, thousands of people of more than 20 nationalities have crossed the border into Ethiopia, fleeing from the violence in neighboring Sudan. Gichachu Miloni, spokesperson of the Amhara region in the northwestern part of the country, which borders Sudan, has told newsmen that in addition to Sudanese and Ethiopian nationals, people from Turkey and Yemen are among those who have arrived. According to reports, temporary shelters and food were being provided for those arriving. A statement by a district near the border said more than 15 buses a day carrying people, including children, were arriving from Sudan. Now, according to reports by Turkish media, 1,600 Turkish citizens had so far been transported to Ethiopia, 189 of whom had been flown to Istanbul. Now, although a 72-hour window was given for a ceasefire in the nation, in some parts of the outskirts from Khartoum, the capital city, firings continue to be heard. Away from that, British attempts to evacuate its embassy staff from Sudan at the weekend delayed efforts by other countries to rescue their own citizens. Senior German political sources have told newsmen the alleged British forces landed in Sudan without the Sudanese army's permission, as other European nations were hoping to airlift citizens to safety. The UK Ministry of Defense (MOD) described that as complete nonsense. Germany, among others, had planned to use the airfield north of Khartoum, from which subsequent evacuation operations have been conducted. But the sources say the unannounced British military presence so angered the Sudanese army that they refused access to the facility. According to one source, having landed without permission, the British had to pay the army before leaving, and negotiations to use the airfield meant that German rescuers lost at least half a day during what was at the time considered to be a very small window of opportunity. Meanwhile, the MOD denied that it was responsible for any delay. Of course, this would become a snag for other nations that are looking for ways to evacuate their citizens to safety. in the latest sign that the violence in Sudan has spread beyond the capital Khartoum. Militiamen have been terrorizing civilians in the city of Nyala in South Darfur. A journalist and rights monitor there has told newsmen. He added that fighters were aligned with the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces RSF, which is involved in a battle for power with the Sudanese army. Where they were accused of ethnic cleansing. Senegal top of list as UFC targets seminal event in Africa. Stay tuned for details of this and more after this timeout.
Good morning, Nigeria. Year after year, they have informed, educated, and entertained us. When you needed information, knowledge, or an escape.
From generation to generation, the Nigerian broadcasting industry has worked tirelessly to serve you.
And now, this service will finally be recognized.
Come May 17th this year, broadcasters all over Nigeria will gather at a hotel and suites for the maiden edition of the Nigerian Broadcasting Awards, an award ceremony set to reward hard work and excellence in the broadcast media. Voting starts on 20th April and ends on 4th May 2023. This award is organized by the Broadcasting Organizations of Nigeria, Bonn.
Business exists only to meet the needs of the people, but there's an extra advantage if your product and services are pitched on a platform that gives you the added advantage over your competitors. For your desired return on investment and so much more, advertise on Spectrum Television, on StarTimes DTH Channel 421 and on free-to-air. With a frequency of 12733. Spectrum Television, broadening your horizon.
Thanks for staying tuned, and now to the rest of the stories. The crisis in Sudan seems to be on the front burner of several conversations, and the military has been carrying out airstrikes against the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces RSF in the capital Khartoum, despite a ceasefire being in force. According to reports, warplanes have been seen over the city's northern suburbs, while fighters on the ground have been exchanging artillery and heavy machine gun fire. It quotes witnesses as saying. Meanwhile, Sudan News has tweeted that 3 civilians were injured when a projectile hit a residential block in Khartoum. It did not say who was behind the attack. Meanwhile, the World Health Organization (WHO) says there's a high risk of biological hazard at a laboratory caught up in the ongoing conflict in Sudan. Officials said it was unclear who was behind the occupation of the National Public Health Laboratory in the capital, Khartoum. The city has been ravaged by fighting between the army and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces (RSF). The WHO told the newsmen that workers can no longer access the lab, and it warned that power cuts were making it impossible to properly manage material at the lab. Officials said that a broad range of biological and chemical materials are stored in the lab. The facility holds missiles and cholera pathogens as well as other hazardous materials. A lack of power is also putting depleting stocks of blood bags stored at the lab at risk of spoiling. In a press conference on Wednesday, WHO officials said it is conducting an extensive risk assessment of the potential public health threat following the seizure of the lab. This would definitely pose a lot of problems post the crisis in Sudan. On the home front back here in Nigeria, unprecedented numbers of malnourished children in need of life-saving treatment are being brought into feeding centers in the city of Maiduguri in northeastern Nigeria. According to the medical charity, since the start of the year, nearly 1,300 children have been admitted to intensive care, the highest number ever recorded in Borno for the period. It added in January, around 75 children were admitted every week with severe malnutrition. By April, that figure had doubled. Some of the children came from detention camps for former members of armed opposition groups, where the living conditions are very harsh. In a separate development, the United Nations Migration Agency says at least 55 migrants have been killed when their Europe-bound dinghies sank off the coast of Libya. Reports say the boat carrying about 60 people had set sail from a town to the east of the capital Tripoli before it capsized. 5 migrants survived, including a Syrian child, and were taken back to shore. Bodies. Meanwhile, Libya is a common departure point for migrants attempting to the perilous Mediterranean crossing to Europe. Hundreds have died so far this year. Meanwhile, a second evacuation flight rescuing UK flight yesterday are expected to be given the chance to fly to the UK from Lanaka Airport later. According to reports, a third flight has departed Khartoum and is in the air. British troops are attempting to get UK nationals out of the East African country during a 72-hour ceasefire. A Foreign Office spokesperson told newsmen that between 230 and 240 people were being evacuated so far. In another development, families of Tunisian political leaders jailed in a growing government crackdown have petitioned the European Union to impose sanctions on the President Kais Saied and his ministers. Reports say a formal request has been submitted on behalf of prominent opposition figures, including the Parliament Speaker and leader of the Ennahda Party, Rachid Ghannouchi, and the former Justice Minister Nuruddin Bihari. Meanwhile, sanctions would ban Saied and his allies from traveling to the bloc and would see the EU assets frozen. The families accuse the Tunisian government of arresting, torturing, and in some cases, killing those deemed to be in opposition. The European Union has previously condemned Tunis, but conditions have since worsened. Elsewhere, survivors of a massacre in northern Burkina Faso have described an hours-long ordeal in which men in army uniforms carried out brutal and in the village of Kama, a part of the country that has been badly hit by jihadists. Speaking to newsmen today, Regional Prosecutor Lamin Kaburi said about 60 people were killed by assailants dressed in army uniforms. Meanwhile, a spokeswoman for the UN's High Commissioner for Human Rights, Ravina Shamdasani, said 150 civilians may have been killed. Lastly, on today's Spotlight Africa, Senegal is the frontier to host the UFC's first event in Africa, described by organizers as a seminal event in history. Africa is the only continent yet to host a UFC event, but reporters have been told the aim is to rectify that at some point next year, with the Dakar Arena the most likely destination. Africa is certainly a smaller arena space where the event will be holding. There is nothing wrong with that, but we like to pack arenas to create a tremendous amount of energy, and of course, the more tickets you have to sell, the better. That's why Dakar is leading, because they have one of the larger arenas in sub-Saharan Africa, and a lot of events have already gone there with success. And that's all we have for you at this time. Do be sure to follow us on social media and subscribe to our YouTube channel, all of which you can find on us in Sudan abates pretty much. Thanks for watching, and do enjoy the rest of your evening.
Spectrum TV, broadening